face.
Did you say how?
No, why?
It's the play.
No, you're excited?
No, I'm scared.
Oh. Remember, it's okay to be scared.
I wouldn't do that.
Why do you keep taking my camera? Hey, brush your teeth, sweetie. Whoa. Door.
Hi again. Hi again.
Hi, Langston.
Why are you recording all of this?
Because I'm leaving. This is part of my documentary.
Hi, I'm Adeline and I'm doing a play.
Ooh. On Juneteenth. I like your costume. Who chose your costume?
I chose my costume.
Okay. Have fun. Love you.
Bye, Daddy.
Bye. Oh, here we go. Camera check. I've been in Sanford all week, really. And I'm finding that, well, let me tell you what I've learned so far. So far, I've learned that to do this by yourself is almost impossible. That said, I like almost impossible because it's the almost. And so the mistakes that I've made and learned from to date, the Titusville March went really well as far as footage is concerned. When I first arrived, I was literally the only African-American person there, which was heartening because that never would have happened when I was in high school here in Titusville, Florida. So there was great support. And then the crowd, as we went on, quickly turned over to probably, I would have to say, majority African-American, but you can look at the footage and we can look at the footage to confirm that. But there was a great mix of people that were supporting. And I think the goal is, given that the African-American population in this country is around 13%, the goal is for these marches to have an accurate representation of the country. You want just as many, and as a matter of fact, an Asian couple, as we were leaving, said, hey, what's going on? We would have marched. We didn't know anything about it. And they were surprised on first that there was a march in Titusville because they said their experience has been very different living here as a minority or a person of color. And they would have joined in. So it wasn't well advertised, and even I found out about it the last minute, and only found out about it because I was researching marches at the time. And so that was the Titusville March. I met a good bruh there, and when I say bruh, from now on, that I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and if I say bruh, it's not me saying hey bro or hey bruh, or it's me talking about fellow fraternity members, who was the former head of the local NAACP. I also spoke to the current president of the local NAACP, and we spoke for a while, and we talked about things coming up with the NAACP, and he was going to get back in contact with me to let me know what functions were happening. He never did, and then I called him because I wanted to check in to see if anything was happening, and he never returned my call. And I would have to say, up to this point, the NAACP, other than the local Titusville president that I spoke to once, but then didn't return my call, no one from the NAACP has returned any of my calls or emails. And that was my experience when I was younger too, and I'll talk about that experience later on camera. But this is a reminder for me to do so. So what I had to remind myself about, I worked, this is right out of college. I just graduated from Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I was working at a place, Pentagon City Mall, that's what it was, Pentagon City Mall, and I was working at Abercrombie & Fitch. When I was hired there, there was one other African-American employee that worked there. And we worked the floor, you know, it's retail, you know, folding clothes and talking to customers and trying to sell shirts and pants, and horrible cologne smell coming out of that store. After about a week, one of the managers came up to me and asked me to follow a black customer. And I was like, why? And they said to make sure that he wasn't stealing anything. And so I looked at this guy who was wearing like $1,000 suit and trench coat. Doesn't mean you're not stealing anything, but I was like, you want me to follow him? And they were like, yeah. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they were like, why not? And I said, why don't you do it? And they just kind of looked at me and shrugged it off and walked away. Later on, there was an African American guy, and he must have been in his 40s at this, and he was writing a check to buy some clothes, and they wouldn't accept his check. They said they didn't accept checks. And literally 5 minutes after that, they took a starter check from a white college student who was like 20-nothing years old. Not exaggerating. They would come up to me and be like, "Hey, homeboy, how you doing, home slice?" and blah blah blah, and they'd have a hat on and they'd turn it backwards and try to walk black um, and I don't, it's so interesting because I was like, well, they must think I'm Uncle Tom, but they got it twisted. And so then another incident, there was a job interview, and they did group interviews at Abercrombie and Fitch. And so, you would get up and you would talk, and they'd give you scenarios. And this African American kid who was around my age was fantastic. He was great, fantastic, stood out amongst everyone else. He was the only black candidate. And then afterwards, the managers, after the prospective employees left, the managers started talking, and they said, they started talking about this kid and how good he was and how dynamic he was and interesting and fun. But they said, he's just too urban. His look is just too urban. And then they looked at me and said, "Don't you think so, Rob?" And I said, no, he was the best person in the room. And they thought he was too urban because he had short dreads. This kid literally looked like he could have been on the Abercrombie and Fitch advertisement. That's the ones that are currently running. But yeah, he was too urban. And so finally, I told my partner, who was also African American, I said, "Hey man, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore." And I wrote a letter to the corporate office, outlining all the things that happened over I think I was there probably 3 months, 4 months, maybe. I don't know. And yeah, so I do know, he called me later and said, "Hey man, they fired all the managers." And then there was a class action lawsuit shortly after that, and I guess they settled. But I was gone by that time, so I didn't pay that much attention. I did get like some measly check in the mail from the class action lawsuit, but yeah, so that's what I had to remind myself about, Abercrombie and Fitch. And I've never, ever, ever, ever stepped foot in that store since. Ever. And never will. I went through and told that whole Abercrombie and Fitch story and forgot to loop it back around to the NAACP. Because before I said I was out, I called the NAACP, the chapter in Washington, D.C. I called them. And I was 21 years old, and I was pissed and angry. And I remember the last straw. I don't know why that was the last straw, but the last straw being when the manager came up to me and was like, "Hey, homeboy, what's up?" And pulled his hat back. And I was just like, And I remember telling the guy, I was never not vocal. I said, "Don't do that again, ever. Don't do it." And he just, again, as they always did, they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and walked away. And so I called the NAACP and spoke to a gentleman on the phone, and I told him what happened. And the first thing he said to me was, not, "I'm sorry this has happened to you. Let's, get behind this and get ahead of this and see what we can do." Wasn't that? The first thing he said is, "Are you a member of the NAACP?" And I said, no, I'm not. And then he said, "So why are you calling?" And I paused. And I was 21 years old. And I thought, I didn't know anything about the ACLU. And I thought, when something like this happens, you call the NAACP. And so I was quiet for a moment. And then I said, "Well, no, I'm not a member, but this happened to me. And this is who I thought I was supposed to call. And he said, well, why don't you think about joining and actually becoming a member and then call me back? That was my first experience with the NAACP. Black Lives Matter has been very proactive and productive and with speaking to me. I spoke to the mayor of Sanford 2 days ago, and he was very receptive to speaking to me. And on Monday, I'm also speaking to someone in the mayor's office of Sanford. Sanford has been very proactive. There's one woman that everyone says I need to speak to, and I'm trying to get in touch with her, and hopefully I can before I leave for Georgia. Let me see, what else? Oh, the mistakes that I've made. Sound. Doing this by myself. When I was interviewing the mayor, I only got camera sound because I had camera sound as a backup. I just forgot to press record on the audio mixer, which would have been superb sound. So that interview is going to have camera sound, and if anybody knows what that is, it's not great, but I will do my best. He was a good person to interview. I've done a number of Zoom interviews, and during COVID, that's just going to be reality of this documentary. And so those first two were unsuccessful because the video didn't record. I was counting on Screenshot and QuickTime and on Apple to record the Zoom and Google Meet calls. And I wanted to do it that way because it was higher quality and higher resolution than just recording, because I have an account with Zoom and could record that way. But I know those recordings aren't good because I use them when teaching and watch the recordings, and the quality is not that good. But QuickTime nor Screenshot and Apple worked. So if you try to use that in the future, do not count on that. It worked for like 5 minutes and that was it. So then there's a Screenshot program, which is an open source program, and I can't remember the name of it and I don't want to butcher it, so I will put it down here so you can see that. And that has a high learning curve, and I got that to work with the mayor of Pelham, Chance Mullum. Sorry, Chance. We've known each other for forever. Chance Mullen, the mayor of Pelham, New York. And so that was the first time I got the video and audio to work. The other two previous interviews were just audio. And I know those two people personally, so hopefully I can do those interviews again. And then after that, I did an online interview with Anitha, and she is a former principal of Titusville High School. And please watch that, because she talks about this kind of racial, I call it a racial pandemic, this racial pandemic and how it relates to education. So that's very interesting to get that perspective from her. So yeah, so now I'm heading to Juneteenth March, and I need to leave because I need to be there by 12. Okay, here we go. So the organizer of this Juneteenth March in Sanford is a young lady named Danielle Bowman, and I just only met her through the mayor.
Onto North Singleton Avenue.
The mayor told me about her and gave me her name and said, hey, you need to contact her and find out about this march. And so again, it was just advertised on Facebook. We have to find a way to advertise these marches to get more people out, because there are people that want to participate and that want to support that just don't know. They aren't aware. So we have to find a better way, and that's part of my journey on this traveling documentary. But I think she, what she's doing is a great thing. She happens to be Caucasian. Okay, so we are in Sanford, Florida. And let me tell you, Sanford, Florida is absolutely beautiful. And I'm not being sarcastic. It is a beautiful city. It's a beautiful town. It's a place where you're like, I could live here. So we're gonna find out if people...
500 feet, turn left onto East 2nd Street.
So we're gonna find out if people actually enjoy living here. It's pretty, but is it pretty?
Now turn left onto East 2nd Street.
It's pretty, but is it pretty? I don't know. People have been very helpful in the other cities. I need to do, once today is over, I'll go back tomorrow and interview people on the street. I'm going to get some interviews, obviously, here at the march of people. And, the purpose is, again, is not to interview celebrities and famous people and experts in this and experts in this field, but to interview people on the ground, citizens that live every day in these cities.
I came up here for college at UCF, and the very first time I went downtown, churches, homes, and little children been sacrificed, adolescents beaten to death with bats and pipes, and most Americans do not care. Say that they never judge the next man and know that they blowing hot air. It's not fair, but homie, it's evident. I got the same skeletons of living evidence. Here's a lesson, kid, from crack addicts.
George Floyd! George Floyd! Silence is violence!
Walk back.
White silence is violence! Black lives matter!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Breonna Taylor!
Breonna Taylor! Breonna Taylor! Breonna Taylor!
Just looking that way.
You go, man.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your help. You can follow me. I'll upload the GoPro stuff as I go.
Yeah.
So you can follow me from here to Georgia to.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's good, man.
Hey, thank you so much for
Thank you, bro, for helping me.
to help and stuff, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man. I'll make sure to give you a shout out. Email me and give me your full information,
overall? Yeah,
and I'll
thank you.
include it in there.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, yeah. All right, man.
Catch you later, man.
All right.
Walk around, you got the t-shirts on, you got the white t-shirt, EG. Don't throw your hands up so they can see you. EG. Keep everybody up.
You register your ancestors to make sure that you register to vote today. Today is Juneteenth, the day that our ancestors fought for, and today is the day that they ended slavery, and that our ancestors in Texas was the last to hear about it. Make sure you exercise your right to vote, because right now we got a bunch of racism in the government system, and we need to read those people out of the government system right now.
All right, so that was. Started raining on us at the very last minute, but this was my stop in Sanford. This was the Juneteenth march. So I have a couple of more interviews. I have one tomorrow morning, and then one Monday, and then hopefully I can get Frances, who's part of the museum that some of the speakers were talking about in the community here in Sanford, and talk to her, which I think will be very informative about the history of Sanford and about Trayvon Martin. All right, so I will see you guys later. Zoom interview in the morning, and then in-person interview Monday, and hopefully I can get with Frances at the museum on Tuesday, and then I leave Wednesday for Brunswick, Georgia. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.